Left after catching my girlfriend cheating with our mutual friend, now I'm skipping town for a new life, unsure if peace follows. For the past 6 months, I found myself barely seeing my girlfriend, Haley, all because of a promotion that had truly been the opportunity of a lifetime. I still remember the way I used to brag about us. Haley and I met back in university, and, to be blunt, she was the love of my life. Sweet, dedicated, fiercely loyal, my best friend. We did incredible things together, made memories I know will be some of the defining highlights of my life. Our travels, our years of spontaneous adventures, the shared laughter that came so easily before all this. That job, though. It pulled the rug out from under us. I was working from dawn to nearly midnight. Weekends weren't sacred anymore, they were filled with phone calls, always more work. I could feel the distance growing, as if every hour spent in my office chair widened the gap just a little more. Still, she was the one cheering me on, always supportive, and she kept telling me I should focus on the job, that we'd move to NYC together once I finished the contract. I realize now how much that time apart was eating away at her, and how I was desperately missing my partner. Then, everything caved in. I came down to the bathroom one morning, wanting to just say good morning to Haley, when I noticed a big love bite on her neck that she'd been hiding under bulky sweaters. I hadn't so much as touched her in weeks, thanks to the scabies I contracted during a trip to Africa. My mind just froze. I suddenly felt like my stomach lined itself with lead. I confronted her right then. She tried telling me it was an allergic reaction, of all things. I pushed her, and denial quickly bled into silence and then a broken confession. We both knew at that point. Turns out, she'd cheated on me. Of all people, it was with a mutual friend, a secret meeting she'd orchestrated because she needed advice about us and ended up seeking comfort in his arms. She broke down begging for another chance, even got on her knees and asked me to marry her there on the bathroom tile. In the end, she left in a taxi, her bags packed by my own hands. The house is mine, nothing legal binding us together. After she was gone, I did everything on autopilot, prepared for work, packed my lunch, ironed my shirt, and then just collapsed with a glass of whiskey and a pack of smokes. That destroyed feeling became my nightly routine for a week. I have a history of depression, and this heartbreak struck harder than nearly anything before, but the deep numbness, the emptiness, was in some twisted way easier to live with than chaos. I wasn't a crying wreck, I just felt done. Hollowed out. Over the next few days, I ignored every one of her 90 missed calls. Eventually, I called her, I told her it was over. I forgave her. I dropped her things at my friend's house while she was at work. I don't hate her. I get why she did it, to some extent. My job did get in the way of a relationship that used to be close and spontaneous. We grew into different people. I can forgive her, but I could never trust her again. I couldn't have her in my life anymore, especially now when my own life is so chaotic. Forgiveness isn't the same as love, not anymore. The days that followed set me on a path I didn't expect. I marched straight to my boss, also one of my best friends, who offered, out of the blue, to donate all his annual leave so I could get my head together. When I explained that just being in that house would suffocate me with memories, he made me another offer, something radical, a year-long position working on a massive project for an international government. I took it. No hesitation. That meant a new country, a new role, a completely different kind of life. I listed my house for rent, my brother agreeing to look after it, bought a one-way ticket, and decided to head to my new home early. I haven't told Haley, no contact, she has all her things. And now, just a couple of hours before the taxi comes to take me to the airport, I'm left with all these burning questions swirling in my head. Should I tell Haley about my move, or is it classless to let her hear it from someone else? How will I ever find real closure, feeling so removed from everything familiar? What if this is just a quick fix? Am I just running away only to come crashing back to earth later, pain and betrayal still festering under the surface? How do I even rebuild in a new country, make friends, find a routine? Was it rash to make these huge decisions so quickly? And most of all, how do I trust and love again, after being cheated on twice? Is it even possible to stay faithful to anyone, or am I just setting myself up for more heartbreak? As I sit here, suitcase packed and my future hanging in the balance, those questions are louder than ever, the ache of betrayal mixing with a fragile hope for something new ahead. Update 1. The kindness and support I received really meant a lot, more than I'd felt in a long time. Some of you might remember I had some questions and that I was about to fly out to start a new life, which I realize now, I never mentioned was in Africa. Things have taken some unexpectedly funny turns since then, so let me bring you up to speed. Despite my best laid plans, I'm still not in Africa, thanks to a minor but perfectly timed collision involving my cab on the way to the airport. No one got hurt, but when you're stuck on the motorway, getting another cab in time is out of the question. Thankfully, insurance has me covered up to my eyeballs, so that wasn't too much of a headache. I called my boss to give him the news, and as I was about to book a new flight for the weekend, he asked me to stay a few more days. Apparently, he'd just been hit with a tidal wave of work, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for this guy, so I agreed. That extra time made me realize I should stick around a little longer, long enough to say a proper goodbye to my family and give them a bit of time before I disappeared for a year. Meanwhile, my boss's secretary spent the week sorting out my life, finding me a new flat, booking all my immunizations, handling all the details, just to say thank you. That was really thoughtful. Through all this, I hadn't told Haley I was leaving. I kept my distance, and no contact was maintained between us. A good friend told me she'd managed to have a conversation with Haley, making it clear that I needed a significant period of silence between us for my own sake. Apparently, Haley's handling it badly, crying, needing friends to take care of her phone, the works. I'd expected hearing that might make me feel better, but it really doesn't. There's only one person I broke my silence for, her father. Anyone else, I'd say never break no contact for an ex's family, but not this man. His friendship and counsel have meant too much to me. We've spent countless hours together, just the two of us, knocking back his incredible whiskey collection and talking about life. He's been vital support, and I couldn't ignore his call. He wanted to know if I could ever forgive his daughter. I had to be honest. I told him there's no point continuing when the trust is fundamentally destroyed. He apologized, accepted it, and then surprised me by urging me to take some time away for myself. He even begged to meet up with me in the city I work in. That's when I told him where I was going, and asked him not to tell Haley until I'd gone. He gave me his word, and with him, that means something. I also left him some messages to pass on to family members once I'd left, because Haley's whole family have been wonderful to me. Since then, things have smoothed out a lot. I've been hitting the gym hard, at least 2 hours every night, except Christmas, sparring with my brother. I've caught up with old friends, spent real quality time with my family, and managed to wrap up the big project that had landed on my boss's desk. As a thank you, he and his wife treated me to an incredible goodbye meal at this unlimited meat place. Honestly, it made me question why everything isn't unlimited meat. My own mood has finally started to lift. There were a few days when I felt worryingly numb, as if nothing could break through, but keeping myself busy has helped me feel normal again. I can't stress it enough. Getting up, getting active, doing things instead of wallowing, it completely shifts your mindset and makes everything easier to bear. Looking ahead, I've already signed up with a Muay Thai gym over there, and believe it or not, I found an old training partner working in the same city. I've arranged to meet up already. My plan is to treat this year like a new adventure, maybe like a year out of university. Work hard, absolutely, but also get everything I can from this experience. I plan to spend all the money I was saving for Haley's birthday trip on myself now. I'm grateful to everyone who's reminded me that there are still people out there you can trust, but for now, I think I need to be single for a while. I'm seriously considering getting some help, because I know I'll be functionally single at least another year, and I don't want distress to become my default setting. I checked in with my old psychologist, since my depression was flaring up, and he actually told me I was handling things surprisingly well, considering. So, yay for small victories. I'm looking forward to this new life so much now, and, even more importantly, I finally believe I can use it as a real fresh start, not just as a way to run and hide my feelings. Maybe, one day, I'll write Haley a letter, try to get some answers to those troubling questions, but I'm not going to do it until I'm sure I'm really on my way to recovery. To everyone else out there struggling, keep yourself busy, stick with no contact, and make your next year about you. That's exactly what I'm planning, and for the first time in a while, I'm excited to see what comes of it. Update 2. After spending the last few months in Africa, I found myself back in the UK for a few weeks, catching up with old friends, family, and my former boss. 4 months ago, my world turned upside down when I discovered my ex had cheated on me. That breakup was the push I needed to accept a job offer in Africa, and honestly, that single decision changed everything for me. Living in Tanzania has been nothing short of incredible. The continent itself is breathtaking, vibrant, and endlessly fascinating. My new job is unlike anything I've done before. I'm gaining wild, unforgettable experience, actually making a difference, and even have my own driver and secretary. It's fast-paced, sometimes chaotic, sometimes beautiful, and never dull. I know that leaving at the end of the year will feel bittersweet. I've really fallen in love with this life. When it comes to recovering from the breakup, I can't imagine a better way to heal. It's impossible to dwell on the past when I'm bumping down dirt roads at sunset, sharing cold beers with new friends, or losing myself in the stunning paradise around me. One of the real perks is working closely with NGOs. There's always an influx of aid workers and volunteers my age, and they absolutely know how to shake off stress and have fun. I'm still single, but there's a great thrill in reclaiming my youth, letting loose, and living for new adventures. Someone once said that every great story starts with a hard shake-up, something that cracks you open and forces you to be braver than you've ever been before. That idea stuck with me, and I realized, Haley and what happened with her is nothing more than the first half of the very first paragraph in what's turning out to be an amazing, exhilarating story. If I needed proof that life can change radically for the better, I've been living it. As for Haley, I've stayed strict with no contact, even blocking her everywhere and cutting off all digital ties. Friends have kept me updated, though. They told me she's been living with her parents, asking around for my African number, and trying to reach out ever since she found out I'd left. We haven't spoken or seen each other since everything imploded. Then, a few days ago when I landed in London, I walked through arrivals expecting to see my mum, and out of nowhere, there's Haley. She stood there, looking lost, and just started crying. I was stunned. Turned out she'd seen my flight details posted on a mutual friend's wall and had taken a 4-hour train just to intercept me at the airport and ask me to take her back. My mum was right in the background the whole time, watching. I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts. Haley looked absolutely broken. I told her nothing had changed, thanked her for coming, because honestly, the whole thing was oddly moving, and gave her some money for a cab home. Admittedly, it was partly because she was a mess, partly because it felt good to be in control of the situation for once. In that moment, it hit me just how far I've come. The feelings I once had for Haley are still there somewhere, but now they feel distant, wrapped in a kind of detached pity. I've never felt more certain that I'm on the right path, doing what's best for me by being on my own. For anyone out there in the thick of heartbreak, life gets better. Stay strong, stick to no contact, take care of yourself, get out in the world, and allow yourself the freedom to rediscover who you are. This doesn't have to be the end of your story, it might just be the start of the best chapter yet. Update 3. I landed back in Dar just before dawn, that hour where the city feels like it's holding its breath. Humidity hit like a warm towel to the face, power was already out at my flat, and Hamazi laughed at me shuffling round by phone torchlight trying to find a clean shirt for work. Within 2 days I was out in the bush again, bouncing around in the back of a Land Cruiser with a broken seatbelt, red dust in my teeth and a clipboard that wouldn't stay flat. A borehole we'd commissioned had become a flashpoint. Someone had started a rumor we were diverting water to a private farm, and by the time we got there it had melted into 20 other rumors. A knot of people had formed around the pump head, voices high, and I could feel that sick, rising prickle of something about to tip. My Swahili is serviceable at best, but it's good enough to say I'm not here to take, I'm here to fix, and to ask who among the elders wanted to come see the tank and the meter with me right then. It was ridiculously simple in the end. We walked the line together, I held my hands under the flow the way everyone else did, we let the water run over our wrists, and a grandmother with the sharpest eyes I've ever seen told the younger men to stop being stupid and to carry the spares from the truck. That tiny laugh that rippled through the group broke everything open. We worked until the sun slid behind the acacias and the insects got loud, then drove back in the dark, eating warm crisps and goat skewers from a roadside fire. Somewhere between the tinny music on Hamazi's radio and the way the dust made constellations in our headlights, I realized I'd gone hours without thinking about the UK, about airports, about apologies at baggage claim. Then the strangest, gentlest blow landed. 2 mornings later, security called up to say there was an older Mzungu at the gate asking for me by name. I stepped out to the courtyard and there he was, Haley's dad, linen shirt creased from travel, grinning in that quiet, apologetic way of his like he was worried he'd gone too far but also quite pleased with himself for doing it. He hadn't told Haley he was coming. He'd sent me one email, got one line back, come if you want, and had simply bought the ticket. We didn't do anything dramatic. I took him to my favorite coffee place with the ceiling fans that struggle in the heat and the mangy cat that sleeps under the pastry case. We spent an afternoon in the fish market with our shoes slick with seawater, watching a boy who couldn't have been 12 gut a tuna with the precision of a surgeon. He insisted on buying a bottle of good whiskey at an eye-watering import price, and that night we sat on my balcony under a lazy fan, sweating and swatting at mosquitoes, swapping stories we already knew by heart. He asked about work and I told him about the ridiculous little triumphs that feel like epics out here. He told me his knees were worse and that he'd finally thrown out the garden hammock he'd always fallen asleep in on Sundays. He didn't come to make a case for her. He said that outright. He came because we'd been friends in our own right, because the last time we'd said goodbye it had been down a phone line with a weight sitting on both our chests, and because he wanted to see where I'd washed up. He gave me an envelope and a small box, both from her. The box had the bracelet I'd bought her on that rainy weekend in Lisbon, the one she'd never taken off in 6 years. The envelope stayed sealed for 2 days, moving round the flat with me like a superstitious charm. I'd put it on the fridge, it would slide to the kitchen table, I'd find it on my dresser, like it was following the light. We took the ferry to Bagamoyo on his last day. He wanted to stand where old travelers had stood and watch dhows stitch their way across the water. We ate too much pilo, he tried to haggle badly for a carved rhino and I kept saying, walk away, for the love of God just walk away, and he couldn't, and he got taken to the cleaners and laughed. On the ride back, a brass band erupted from nowhere and we both stood there grinning like idiots because you can't be miserable with that much trumpet going on at once. At the gate he pulled me into a hug we both held a fraction too long. He asked me, again, quietly, if there was any chance. I said what I've been saying, I wish her the world. I'm not it anymore. He nodded in that way that means, right, then, that settled, and got into his cab. I read her letter during a blackout, candles sweating wax, geckos clicking along the walls. It was not a manifesto. 2 pages. She didn't beg. She didn't spin. She wrote that she was in therapy, that the thing with our mutual friend had been less a lightning strike than a slow, stupid slide she hadn't stopped when she should have, which to me is worse and better in equal measure. She wrote about loneliness and about the way our silence had felt, and she wrote a sentence so plain and so honest that I had to sit down and just breathe. I did the unkindest thing to the person who was kindest to me. She said she didn't deserve my forgiveness but was grateful for it anyway. She hoped I'd never come back to her out of habit. There was a photo tucked in, us on the cliff in Ireland, me squinting into the wind, her hair all wrong because it always got tangled in the salty air. I folded it all back up and realized that, for the first time, I didn't feel the panicked itch to ask more. The hole where the why sat had finally stopped ringing. The same week, the other shoe dropped. An email slid in from our mutual friend with a subject line that could have been torn from a confessional pamphlet. No excuse. He wrote the sort of sprawling, self-flagellating apology that tries to preempt every response, and he put his number at the bottom like a dare. I stared at it for a long time, then typed 4 words and a period and sent them before I could polish them into something I didn't mean. I forgive you. Do not contact me again. I shut my laptop and went to the gym and hit pads until my forearms sang. Somewhere in all this, life found me again in ways that felt almost comic. I said yes to sparring at a pop-up ring on Cocoa Beach and got my nose bloodied by a kid 10 kilos lighter and 10 years younger who laughed and hugged me after like he just met a long-lost cousin. Hamazi's cousin's dog had puppies and one of them, an ugly, toothy little scrap with a white moon on his chest, decided I was his person the moment I crouched down. I named him Wetsy. He has chewed 3 of my flip-flops, sleeps like he's been shot and follows me from room to room like a shadow with opinions. The first morning I took him running along the peninsula, the city was still a smear of pink, fishermen hauling nets hand over hand. He stopped dead every time he saw a crab and barked like it had broken some elaborate social contract by existing. Work pressed in too, as it does. I got called into a meeting with a permanent secretary and 3 people in suits who didn't smile, and someone I barely knew slid a folder across and offered me an extension before the end of my current term. Just like that. Another year of this chaos and grace, if I wanted it. I asked for time to think and walked out into the heat with the kind of grin I couldn't stop wearing on my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my choices by what would make me less afraid, I was weighing them by what would make me more alive. I haven't sent a letter back. I won't. There's nothing to add that the quiet hasn't already said. Haley knows where I am the way you know where someone once put a bruise on your life, you can map it without looking. Her dad left with a promise to come back before the year is out, not as an emissary, just as a friend who likes my balcony and the way the city hums at night. The bracelet sits in a drawer. Mwetsi has learned to leave it alone, the call to prayer threads through my mornings now. The generator grumbles awake when it wants to. Some nights the sky opens and the rain turns the roads into chocolate, and we all drive like children, giddy and a little terrified. I still have days where the weight drops out of nowhere and I catch myself reaching for a ghost. But the new shape of my life holds. I go home sunburned and salty, dust in my eyebrows, and I sleep. I wake to a world that feels less like something I'm surviving and more like something I'm inside of, fully. And that, more than anything anyone has ever said to me, feels like closure. Update 4. The rains came in with that blunt force drama the city does so well. 1 minute heat haze, the next a sky so black it felt like we'd been dropped under a lid. Mzimbazi turned into a brown animal overnight, and by morning the Jangwani Bridge had that huddled look it gets when water crowds the edges and every bus driver turns philosopher. We'd planned a quiet site visit and ended up ankle deep, then knee deep, trousers pasted to our legs, ferrying sacks of cement and a terrified goat to higher ground while Hamazi shouted "Pole! Pole!" at the river like it might slow out of manners. A kid in a Spider-Man t-shirt insisted on carrying my tape measure like it was a scepter. We spent an hour pushing a minibus that had tried to make it and failed in such a dignified way the driver kept pointing at the bonnet like, "You see, this is exactly where my miscalculation lies." It was chaos and it was oddly joyful. Someone started frying mandazi on a portable burner under a tarpaulin, and by the time we'd triaged what we could, moved tools, saved paperwork into a dry bucket, checked on the old woman who lives by the tire shop and has a cackle you can hear over rain, my phone was buzzing with the sort of message you don't ignore. Permanent secretary at 11, come soaked if you must. They handed me the extension in a room that smelled of wet wool and furniture polish. 3 signatures at the bottom of a letterhead that looked far too official to be about my messy, sunburnt life. Another year, if I wanted it. A different region for part of it, maybe the lake, maybe the border. I said what I'd said before, time, and this time it wasn't about fear or even strategy. It was superstition. Like not jinxing a streak by naming it. I walked out into a city rinsed clean and humming, rain still ticking on the leaves, and the question sat next to me in the back of the car like an old friend who knows not to talk yet. 2 days later I went down with malaria like I'd been body checked by a ghost. 1 hour fine, the next with bones full of static and teeth chattering like I'd swallowed ice. The fever unspooled those bright, nonsensical dreams, my year 7 maths teacher in a kanga arguing with a fishmonger about prime numbers. Mwetsi the size of a donkey demanding papaya politely in flawless Queen's English. I could taste metal every time I blinked. Neighbors did what neighbors do here better than anywhere I've known. Mama Flora appeared with uji and a cloth dipped in water, batting my useless protests aside with one hand while texting her daughter to feed the dog with the other. Hamazi moved into my spare room without announcement and spent an evening telling me the plot of an action film I've never seen in the slow, rhythmic Swahili you use with small children and the very old because that's what he had in the toolkit and, God help me, it worked. On day 3, someone's aunt prayed in my doorway in a voice so kind I cried from somewhere my dehydration couldn't reach. I kept thinking how strange it is to be helpless and held by people who were strangers 8 months ago. How simple it feels when nobody expects you to be brave. When the fever broke, it was like a spell lifting. 1 minute a too tight shirt you couldn't get out of, the next bare skin and air. The doctor told me to rest, so I did the only restful thing I can do, which is refuse to sit still in place and go where the world is wider than my head. We took the battered boat out from wth at dawn, the sea that kind of glass that makes you suspicious, the engine coughing like an old man who refuses to stop smoking. Mafia Island took its time with us. Whale sharks are the least believable thing I've ever put my body next to, and absolutely real. Those cartoon spots, that impossible, slow confidence as they move, the plankton haze rising in soft clouds. I slid into the water holding my breath for reasons that were not scientific, watched a mouth like a garage door pass a meter from my knees, and felt something I hadn't let myself risk in months, maybe years, all with nothing conditional attached to it. When I climbed back in, spitting salt and trying not to grin so hard my face creaked, the question about the extension wasn't a question anymore. Of course I was staying. I'd forgotten what it was to be surprised by delight. I didn't want to leave a place that still had the ability to put my whole nervous system on its heels and say, look. The same week, the small, stupid things kept happening the way they always do, and I loved them for it. Mwetsi discovered coconuts, and the sound of a dog trying to reason with a piece of fruit is going to live rent-free in my skull until I die. He also found a creative way to get my attention by eating exactly one corner of my passport and then sitting in front of me with the kind of Etonian guilt I've only ever seen in Labradors. The consular officer looked at me over his glasses like I was the first man in human history to have owned a dog. Of all the corners, he said, as if he'd been out personally measuring them, this is the least consequential. He stamped a form, told me to buy a folder, and on the way home a man in Koreaku sold me one so neon it buzzed in its own light. I got stopped at a checkpoint for the crime of having an overexcited puppy, a foreign face and a suspiciously glowing piece of stationery, and the officer laughed so hard he forgot to be officious. Work answered the extension for me again by doing that thing where it flips the table just to see if you can put the legs back on. A contractor vanished mid-job, like actually vanished, phone off, office locked, a rumor that he'd hopped the border to dodge a loan shark. The borehole community, the same lot we'd been up to our shins with in the flood, didn't wait for us to wring our hands. They called a harambe. We brought what we could, tools, a generator that starts if you threaten to sell it, and stood there useless for a minute as 4 men unrolled chain link like they were born doing it. A teenager in a Beyoncé t-shirt tied rebar with the efficiency of an old man who hates wasting time. Someone's grandfather turned up with a spade older than me. We spent a Saturday that should have been a bureaucratic nightmare digging post holes and learning a new pattern of work: say yes, get out of the way, hand the spares over. I went home filthy and delirious with that particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sadness. There have been nights too. A friend dragged me to a wedding where I was immortalized on 100 aunties' phones as the Mzungu who cannot, to save his life, find the downbeat. A blackout party in a courtyard where someone strung fairy lights off a car battery, and a woman I'd only just met leaned against the wall in a way that made my chest go hot and quiet. We didn't kiss. We swapped scar stories, and she told me she once treated a hyena like a dog in a hospital car park and learned very quickly that hyenas are not dogs. She left me with the smell of coconut oil in my shirt and a name I'm not going to put here because I don't know yet what shape it is, and for now I like it better unlabeled. A corruption probe floated too close to my desk for comfort, and I got my first brown envelope, which I handed back with the kind of brittle politeness that makes you sound like your mother. There was a moment by a lift where a man smiled without humor and reminded me I am a guest here, and I said, carefully, that being a guest means wearing your best shirt to dinner and not rearranging your host's furniture, but it doesn't mean taking the silver on your way out. We both pretended it was a joke and then made sure not to meet each other's eyes again for the rest of the week. The work kept moving in that stubborn, incremental way it does when it's being done by people who have decided, together, that it will. I signed the extension on a Thursday morning that smelled faintly of diesel and jacaranda. No ceremony. Just my name in a box and a pen that wouldn't start until I scratched at the corner of a newspaper like I was coaxing a sleeping animal awake. I sent one text after I did it, to a number saved under a name I refused to change because it would feel like killing something twice. Proud of you, lad. Came back inside a minute, and I took the dog out and let him run from coconut to coconut until his tongue went silly. There are still slips. I walked past a stall the other day, cotton bracelets, cheap rings, an entire tray of tin saints, and caught Lisbon in a smell I don't have a word for, rain on stone and burnt sugar and the kind of soap old hotels use. It winded me in that precise, clean way a memory can. Then a lorry backfired, a woman yelled at her cousin for shortchanging her on tomatoes, a small boy hurled himself into a puddle with the joy of a missionary, and the world took my face in both hands and turned it gently back to now. In the evenings, the geckos click a metronome on the wall and the fan keeps time badly and the sea breathes in and out 3 streets over. The bracelet is still in the drawer and getting easier to forget. The photo is where I left it. Mwetsi dreams like a thing being chased by his own feet. I say goodnight to the generator like it's a grumpy uncle. I wake up knowing the same things we all forget and relearn in cycles, that you can make a home out of nothing but mornings, that apologies don't have to be doorways, that love is not a single country you leave and never see again. The airport is still there. So is everything it represents. I just don't hear it calling anymore. Update 5. The lake does a different kind of blue. Ocean blue is an argument, always busy with its own ideas. Lake blue settles. It stares you down. We flew west on a turboprop that sounded like it resented the very concept of movement, and the air got thinner and the edges got older, and then there we were dropping into Kigoma, the tarmac shining like it had just been licked. Hamazi hates flying. He gripped the armrest and told me solemnly, if God wanted me in the clouds he would have made me a bird, and then fell asleep with his mouth open. Before we'd crossed Morogoro. We'd come because a new intake for the hospital had stalled, the pipe arriving on one lorry and the intake head on another that had apparently decided Rwanda was a more promising future. The brief said border complexities, which always turns out to mean a man in an office made a decision and now 20 people with spades will pay for it unless somebody goes outside and figures. The lake greeted us with that heavy heat that crawls inside your shirt and refuses to leave. A fish eagle lifted up from a pole like it had been launched, and a kid with a shaved head tried to sell me 3 tangerines with the confidence of a hedge fund manager. Our fixer, who introduced himself as only God knows as if he had personally negotiated with his birth certificate, had already found us a boat and a foreman with hands like leather love letters. We took the boat out at dawn, the engine coughing black and the water not interested in any of our nonsense. The intake point was a simple scribble on a map overlaid on a space that didn't care what our pens had done. We killed the engine a few meters out. When quiet came, it came complete, the kind you can feel touching your teeth from the inside. I rolled my trousers and went in and felt that hush like a hand pressing me down to my right size. We measured, we argued about nothing in particular and everything that matters, the angle of a pipe, the direction of a current. A fisherman called Musa drifted by smoking a cigarette with the spectacular disinterest of a man who has watched 1,000 versions of us and knows our lifespan to the minute. He spat, considered us, and then said, in the tone of a prophecy, your pipe will sing if you make it face the hill. We changed the angle. I wrote Musa in the corner of my notes and drew a tiny fish next to it because I have started doing small, ridiculous things like that as if making the page charming will change the world. On the second day, we took a run up to the border to see about the lost intake head. The office had the practice shabbiness that means everything gets done and nothing gets admitted. A man in a tie 3 degrees too tight gestured towards the box in the corner as if I were a magician and he was unveiling my assistant. There's a flavor of the word chai that only comes from a certain way it's said. You could pour it in a cup or you could place it in an envelope, and both have steam. I felt the conversation choosing a fork. Then a grandmother in a chitinge the color of mangoes swept in like an emissary from a stern god and rapped the desk with her knuckles and said, loudly enough to rearrange the room, that no son of hers, and she meant all of us, would hold a hospital's drinking water hostage for sugar money. The secretary at the back laughed so hard she had to pretend to cough. The tie relaxed. We signed 6 pieces of paper that all said the same nothing in slightly different fonts, and walked out with the box. I tried to press fare for the old woman's bus into her hand and she looked me in the eye and told me, Shikamu, Mzungu, but don't make me small. I said marahaba and put my money back in my pocket and felt about 6 inches taller for being told off properly. There's a camp not far outside Kigoma where the world tips and then catches itself, full of people who were planting beans somewhere else and then one morning weren't allowed to plant beans there anymore. It sits in the dust like a city rememberer, made of tents and queues and logistics and phone chargers strung from improbable places. We were asked to look at the taps because there was talk of stomachs turning and we do not haphazard stomachs. We rolled out chlorine drums under a sky that behaved as if it might cry or might light a match. We would have to wait and see. A boy wearing a Manchester City shirt 2 sizes too big pointed at my dog-eared notebook and asked if my dog did my numbers for me. I told him my dog could barely count to coconut. He didn't laugh. He was 8 in a place that had asked him to be 30 and he looked at my face like it was a joke he wanted to enjoy later when the world loosened its fist. She was there. I knew before I saw her because someone shouted her name wrong and then there she was, hair plaited flat against her head, the line of concentration between her eyebrows like a familiar road. The woman from the blackout courtyard. The one with the hyena story and the coconut oil. This time she was in scrubs the color of sea glass with her sleeves rolled up, a pen behind her ear and a look nurses and mechanics share. This is broken, I will fix the part I can reach. She clocked me, did that tiny recalibration you watch run across someone's eyes like weather, and then we were already working. She handed me a roll of test strips, I held a light on a tap head while she peered for leaks. We spoke in those work units, one-liners that are all verb, no flourish. Somebody cried, somebody laughed, somebody complained because that is also a fluid measurement of whether the world is still obeying its rules. When the sun fell, we fell with it onto 2 plastic chairs by a water tank that hummed like an amplifier. We shared a stale biscuit and a liter of something luminous that claimed to be orange. She told me there'd been 3 births that week in the middle of everything. The oldest woman alive in camp had told her a joke filthy enough to shift tectonic plates, and that she was learning to dream with her eyes open in short, checked parcels like a parcel depot. I told her about Musa and the pipe that would sing if it faced a hill. We didn't kiss again. We didn't even brush hands. There was the stink of chlorine on both our skin and a thin film of fatigue across our faces and the feeling that you get when an engine idles steady and it's better not to touch any switches. In the night the lake threw sheet lightning up at the clouds, no rain, just light practicing its handwriting. She leaned back and showed me a scar on her calf she hadn't told me about last time, courtesy of a motorbike that believed in optimism over traction. I told her about Mwetsi eating my passport and the exact snobbish tilt of the consular officer's glasses. We sat until the generators cut and the stars began doing their indulgent trick where they turn the sky into salt, and then we slept in separate canvas boxes within earshot of one another and woke up with our work in both our mouths like a taste. I keep being startled by how the small, unserious things can take your day hostage and make it better. In Kigoma someone put on a communal goat fashion show by accident. I am not joking. There was a fundraiser in the schoolyard and a man with a glitter microphone that didn't work, and then suddenly a procession of goats draped in chitinge with their horns beaded, being paraded by small boys who took it more seriously than any UN mandate I've ever read. A grandmother, different, also mango-colored, thrust a sash over my head and told me I had to pick a winner because white men in sunglasses should be made to prove they have taste. I chose the one with socks. The socks were actually 4 cut-off sleeves from a child's jumper that had been repurposed by an auntie with vision, and the crowd roared in agreement because, my God, the pageantry. Only God knows laughed so hard tears made tracks on his dust. Back in Dar, the city had been rearranged 4 degrees in my absence, as it always is. The new kiosk at the corner, the man who used to fix umbrellas now fixing eyelashes, the pedestrian who has decided zebra crossings are advisory. Mwetsi greeted me like a person who has been keeping secrets on my behalf, smothered my face, wriggled like a landed fish and presented me with a dead flip-flop I had never owned. Mama Flora had cut her hair and told me it made her head cooler, which is the kind of information I am grateful to receive because it means I am inside the weather of this place, not just watching it. We got a call from the radio station because apparently I was now a voice of something and could I please come and be sensible about water on air. I put on my friendliest shirt and by the time I was in front of a microphone someone had already made up new facts. The presenter introduced me as Bwana, engineer from Canada and then corrected to Australia and then settled on our friend James, who knows pipes. I have never been an engineer and my name is not James, but in that moment it seemed unkind to pick at embroidery. We talked about leaks and bill collection and the way a tap is not a miracle, but if it works every day it might as well be. The phone lines lit up with men who were in love with the sound of their own grumbling and women who had one question that took 3 minutes to unfurl and a finish that cut straight to the right place. When I left, a security guard asked for a selfie and did not flip the camera around, and I now own a photo of a stranger's extremely confident forehead. Then the not funny thing that is also part of this, we caught a corruption probe cold at our own table, not next to it but in our plates. A contractor came in too smooth and put an envelope down too easily and I slid it back like a playing card I was bored of and he smiled with a mouthful of teeth meant to reassure and we all walked out of there in our best shirts and none of us were relaxed. The next morning the same man was outside my gate without any envelope at all, just a face that had been run through a ringer. He said he'd been told what I'd said by the lift, that thing about shirts and silver, word gets around, and that he had a boy who played with my dog sometimes outside the shop on the corner and could we maybe try to not make each other's lives harder. We stood there in the morning glare careful as surgeons. We agreed on what we would not do by describing nothing either of us planned to attempt. He left with his dignity intact and I went inside and watered my 2 plants and told them both, out loud, that they were doing a very good job, and then I sat in the shower until the water went cold and reminded my spine to turn back into a spine. I keep moving between instants of bigness that you can point at and say, look, and the tiny oddities day throws and they buoy me just the same. Hamazi's sister had a baby, tiny and furious and completely unimpressed with any of us. We went to see them with a bag of rice and a dish that I pretended to have cooked and the baby grimaced at me like I had deeply offended her with my existence and then farted so heroically that the whole room cheered. A girl in a taxi van tried to teach me the claps to a song I hadn't heard and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes because I live consistently and stubbornly offbeat. I got pulled into a school career day where I said the words project management to the most skeptical faces on earth and then a boy at the back asked if I missed where I came from. I told him that sometimes missing is like a tame thing you feed from your hand and sometimes it is a wild thing that climbs in through your rib cage and sleeps there, and right now, the wild thing is sleeping more than it wakes. He nodded like that was the most adult answer available to me and his teacher looked at me in a way that made me think I had not ruined entire worlds. The woman from the camp, and I keep not naming it. She swung back through Dar for 2 nights before heading to the lake again and we went to a bar that sells 3 things, beer, mishkaki and the promise you will leave with chili under your fingernails. We told each other what our mornings had looked like people do when the evenings feel too large to pick at. She put her hand on my knee in the noisiest bit of the night, not a claiming, not a flag, just a warm, declarative sentence. I put my palm over her knuckles and both of us looked at our hands like separate animals that had decided to be polite. We walked home the long way because the power was out and the sea had decided to make a sound like someone flipping a heavy page. We stopped where the road dips and you can see 2 palm trees make the precise wrong angle against the sky. We didn't kiss. We are both too careful in exactly opposite ways. It felt like standing at a gate that doesn't lock and enjoying the fact that it doesn't. Haley appears now as if she's placed a small mirror in an old cupboard in a house I used to live in and every now and then the light hits it and I catch a sliver I didn't mean to see. Her father sent a photo of his knee, fantastically bruised from surgery, with the caption, "Still prettier than you in the morning." He told me he'd gone back to his Sunday hammock with a stronger stand and that the neighbor's cat had immediately asserted squatters' rights. He didn't mention her and I didn't ask, and there was a ease in that restraint that felt new. It's mango season and mango logic applies to everything. You plan for mess but you cannot prepare for sweetness. A boda went out under me in the market rain and I rolled instinctively, unheroically, like a man who wants to keep all his bones in the original order. A stranger reached down and hauled me up so hard my armpit squeaked and told me, "Haraka haraka haina baraka, slow down," which is the sort of wisdom this country hands out free with change. The intake at the lake started singing. Musa came to see it and lit a cigarette in cautious honor like he might be yelling at God for showing off. The camp's taps ran with a smell that is not pleasant but is reassuring if you understand what it means, and the kids held their jerrycans under and did that universal dance that means your arms are heavy and you're bored and you are completely fine. In the office someone brought donuts for no reason and we ate them like champions. At night the geckos still click their nonsense and my fan still tries and the call to prayer threads itself through the hour where I am awake anyway and nothing about that is sad. The airport is a place where strangers kiss other strangers and reunions look like forgiveness and departures look like ambition. It still exists and sometimes my car passes under the flight path and we lift our heads when we hear an engine, the way all animals do. But I don't hook my life onto its timetable anymore. My calendar is written in rains and dry spells and when the mangoes drop in weather Mwetsi will attempt to murder another coconut instead of walking around it, like a sensible creature. He has learned the word for sit in 3 languages and obeys none of them unless bribes are on obvious display. I sleep and wake. I drive past the same stretch of Msasani where the pothole got a little bigger and somebody planted a sunflower in it as a dare to the council and nobody's moved it because it is too cheerful to argue with. I do not keep score. That is new, and it's as loud as trumpets.